What inspired you to create the Museum of Failure? How did this start?
There's actually two versions of this. One is I started Museum of Failure because I was so tired of all the success stories that we were force fed by, media,
Likewise.
etc. Yeah, it's just
Likewise.
like, oh,
Kindred souls here.
I can't stand another story of some successful jerk saying like, oh, just emulate my life and you can be successful too. I
Of
hate
course.
that. And that was all like sort of new business development, innovation focused stuff, and I was just too much of that. That was one reason, and the second reason was I was fascinated with the research on how difficult it is to deal with the discomfort of talking about failure, but also because we avoid talking about it, how difficult it is to learn from failure. So,
Mm.
and I wanted to find a new way of presenting the information. I didn't want to write a book. I didn't want to write some articles. I wanted to do something else, and I couldn't find what that else was. And I stumbled into a museum called Museum of Broken Relationships back in 2016, and then I realized like if they can make a museum out of an abstract concept of broken relationships, I thought like, dang, I can do a museum of failure then, and then that's where I started working on that.
Is it true that when you originally registered the domain name, you actually failed to spell museum correctly? Is that a true story?
Next question. No, 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 it's a true story. I got so excited and I was like, oh man, I'm so smart. I got this great idea and I bought the domain and I was just so happy because, most good domains are already taken. And I got museumoffailure.com, and then I got the confirmation email that said, congratulations, you own museumoffailure.com. So I like to say I'm the only founder and curator that can't spell the word museum.
What are some of the top exhibits?
So there's some that are silly and fun, and then there's other ones that might have some more learning there. But
Let's
the
go with
most
silly and fun
silly
first.
and
Let's hear
fun.
some of the fun
All
ones.
right, let's take the Euro Club. Euro with a U. So imagine let's just I will set the scene here. You're a man and you're out playing golf and you have to urinate. What do? You can't just go urinate on the grass, right? And there aren't trees everywhere. Um, so you take the Euro Club, which looks like a golf club, but it's got a hollow sort of canister inside or in built in. So you unscrew the top of it, and then you just urinate into the golf club. Um, and in the
And there's a
ads,
towel that comes with it.
yeah, it's
You put
called a
this, you kind of, yeah, you just stand
privacy
there and
towel.
pee.
The
Yeah.
privacy towel you clip onto your belt, and then you fumble under the belt to urinate into the golf club, the Euro Club. It's a funny thing. It's funny because it's so silly, but I mean, there was a real reason for it. I mean, if you need to urinate, and older we men get, the more we have to urinate. So I mean,
Oh
it
yeah.
does make a lot of sense, but it's also a strange, funny, silly product.
Love that product.
Another one that gets a lot of attention is the Rejuvenique face mask. It's also a silly one. It's a mask that shocks your face. So it looks like something out of a horror movie. It's a beauty treatment, and you put conductive gel on about 50 electrodes, and then you strap it onto your face and turn it on, and it shocks your face, and supposedly it rejuvenizes your face and makes you look young. The interesting thing about it is that the spokesperson was Linda
Hi,
Evans
I'm Linda
from the
Evans.
hit show
Wow.
Dynasty. So basically,
Sure.
it said if you use this for 3 months, you look as beautiful as a Hollywood movie star.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah, it's a funny thing because it looks horrible. It looks like something like say out of a horror film. But yeah, I don't know if it works. Can you see? Does it? Do I look
Yeah,
beautiful?
you look
Yeah.
amazing. You look
Yeah.
like you've
Thank
gotten
you.
younger since I saw you 6 years ago.
It's only thanks to Rejuvenique.
That's right. What about the handheld vinyl record player? That never caught on, huh? It was like
Ooh,
a handheld
yeah,
portable record player.
portable. It's called the Soundburger. So basically, you had the Walkman to play tape audio cassettes, and now that's super portable. And then the company that made Soundburger is like, hey, Audio Technica, I think is the name. They're like, hey, let's make a portable vinyl player. So it looks like what is it? Like the vinyl when you play it, it sticks out of the device.
Right. Yeah. It's like you know what I can picture it as is if you ever did track and field and there's these measuring tapes where someone
Oh,
holds the end and there's like a handle
yeah,
and a
yeah,
big
yeah,
wheel that the measuring
yeah.
tape spools off of. So it's kind of shaped like that. It's like there's a handle and then there's a big disc sticking out of this thing.
Yeah, that's exactly. That's what it is. So to get back to the why it's a failure, the record itself is not protected, right? So it's like hanging on the outside of the device, and then you need a clean, stable surface to play it on, and you can't play it while it's moving. It has to be stable,
Hmm.
and I mean, it just defies the whole purpose of having a portable
Sure.
music player.
Never worked.
But to its defense, the Soundburger is a collector's item because it has exceptionally good. It's a high quality uh, um, uh, player. What do you call it? Vinyl player.
Yeah.
It's a turntable. It's a really good quality one. They got everything right on the quality, but the whole user experience wasn't quite successful.
So what are the more educational, informative exhibits that we can learn from?
I mean, the ones that I think are maybe more interesting for learning is are the ones that, like, for example, there's I mean, this the people are kind of bored with it, but I mean, I love the story of Kodak, inventing the digital cameras in the 70s and then becoming the biggest player and the most innovative, technologically uh, competent and experienced company making digital cameras for consumers. And then they were technologically way advanced and innovative, but they didn't change their business model. So they still, as the whole world was transitioning to digital, Kodak insisted on making money selling expensive photo paper.
Hmm.
So they were like they got everything right except the business model, and that's what killed them.
Kind of like
Um,
Blockbuster.
Same, very similar story to Blockbuster. They got everything right, but still got and saw the future, was part of the future of digital streaming, but then failed on the actual business model of the whole thing. So it's not just people get like confused. If innovation is only about tech stuff, it's not. It's about your business model equally, maybe sometimes even more important.
Yeah. The Museum of Failure is not really about laughing at those who have taken the risk and failed. What's the purpose of it?
So the aim of the Museum of Failure is to help people appreciate that failure is essential to progress. And there's no way you can have any kind of progress or innovation without failure. There's no such thing as like playing it safe, completely safe when it comes to progress. And if we don't appreciate that, you can't have the good stuff. We wouldn't have these smartphones today, as perfect and cheap as they are, if there hadn't been thousands of failures before then. So you have to accept the bad with the good. So that's one thing. That's accepting failure is important. The second aim is that to help us appreciate and understand that we have to learn from our failures. So in order to learn from our failures, we have to be able to discuss them, even if it's
Mm.
uncomfortable. And there's a third aim that's sort of grown organically from visitors, which is that many people feel liberated. So like when they see the the big boys, big companies, these massive companies with seemingly unlimited resources and super intelligent people, and knowledge of their markets, they still fail when they try new things and when they experiment and explore. And it kind of people do feel liberated, like, wow, these guys can fail, then so can I as an individual or a small business owner.
Yeah, and feel validated that hey, if these really smart people who have
Yeah,
huge budgets can
yeah,
fail, it's okay if I do as well.
yeah. I have this story if you want to hear
Please.
about this. So this was several years ago at the museum, and there was this couple there who spent way too much time at the museum, like way too, like two more than 2 hours. And they came up to me afterwards, and they're like, "Oh, Dr. West, this is such a wonderful, wonderful museum." And I'd kind of gotten used to that. I'm like, "Ah, yeah, thank you, that's good, that's awesome." They're like, "No, you don't understand. This has changed our life." I'm like, "Okay, well, what's going on?"
Hmm.
Turns out that they were so like inspired by seeing these, these super experienced, resource strong companies fail. They said, like, we own a small bed and breakfast in Barcelona, Spain, and after visiting your museum, we've decided to take a meaningful risk. Finally, pause, dramatic pause. We're going to update our breakfast menu. Isn't it beautiful? Like,
Yeah, that's
I
great.
mean, for them, that was a big risk. They hadn't taken it. And then now they come to the Museum of Failure and they see, the Googles and Netflix and whatever, they're failing, doing their thing. And they're like, no, we can also take a meaningful risk. And I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say they were, we're going to take on private equity or venture capital. We're going to
No,
expand. We're
no.
going to
We have fresh
create
fruit on
multiple
our menu.
locations. Yeah, we're gonna update the menu. But that's it, right? This like we can be so locked in so many little
Yeah,
ways that are almost invisible in our
yeah,
lives that
yeah,
we don't even see, we don't even know, we don't even notice. They're unconscious, and we
yeah,
just go about our day, and we have the safe conversation, we do the thing the way that we've always done it because that's the way we've always done it. And hey,
yeah.
if it's not broke, don't fix it. If the breakfast menu, if people are showing up and eating breakfast and things are fine, we're don't fix it. But
No,
that's not where innovation comes
no.
from, that's not where growth comes from.
Definitely, definitely not.
You said that one of the purposes, one of the goals is to get people to discuss failure, right?
Yeah.
And why is that so hard? Why is it hard for us to have a conversation about failure when what you're telling us is that failure is where innovation happens if you discuss it, if you learn from it? I'm going to reflect back for my listeners. If you listen to episode 246 and 247, I interviewed Tim Ferriss, and he said failure in and of itself does not mean you're going to be successful. Plenty of people go through their entire lives as failures, but it's the learning that comes from failure. Talk about that.
Absolutely. There's another. There's a YouTube video by one of the founders of Up Nights that does sort of events where they invite people up on stage to talk about their failures. Her main point is that what's the point of failing and failing forward and being all acceptance of failure if you're not actually learning from it? And and she says that we should be failing more mindfully, which I think is
Mm,
another way of putting it. Like, you fail, it hurts, it's uncomfortable, it costs money, it costs, prestige, reputation. There's all kinds of costs to failure, and it's uncomfortable. And one of those is the stigmatization of failure. Like, if people are not willing to talk about it, and whether it's companies or us as individuals, then that sort of keeps that stigmatization alive. If people were more open about talking about it, I don't think it would be that stigmatized. A historian had written a book. I can send you the link with his name and everything later.
yeah.
But
We'll throw in the
where
action plan for the listener. We'll have that in the action plan, but go ahead.
yeah, where he actually describes that a failure as a concept is relatively new. Like, before the American capitalism sort of grew and everything was measured in terms of financial success, the word failure was something that could only happen to physical objects or like projects. So you could build a bridge and then it crumbled, so that was a failed project. Or you could build something and it fails. Some kind of endeavor with failure, but a person was never a failure.
Mm.
And it wasn't until the whole sort of industrial explosion in the United States where people started to call other people failures because of their financial situation or because they made bad decisions money wise. And I think that's quite interesting, where
Mm.
we take it for granted. Oh, that you're a failure, or you're a loser, or you're something negative there because of something you've done, and then that can sort of stay with you for a long time.
Yeah, that's the
Totally.
personal side of it.
Yeah.
We can feel like a failure when actually, if we can simply look at the event or the occurrence, whatever it was, as a failure, and actually something that we can learn from. But
Yeah.
it's so personal.
Yeah.
It's emotional. It's okay. Like
Total.
there's I think there's this conversation out there, or this sort of feeling in the culture and society that, people buy into this concept of success through failure, and the failure museum, and sort of the purpose of it. Yeah, that's great. The Googles of the world, even they fail, but that's how they innovate, and that's great.
Yeah,
But wait a second. I just applied for that job. That promotion. I didn't get it. It's nice for you to fail in Google
yeah,
and these other,
yeah.
like,
That's
and for my
fine.
kid, I could talk to my kids about it. Hey, you failed in the soccer game, but gosh, you played a better team and you learned from it. But wait a second, when this happens to me, it's like, okay, there's proof. I'm not good enough. I'm
Yeah,
not smart enough. I'm not capable.
absolutely.
This success isn't for me. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and it's easy to internalize your failed whatever projects or anything you've you've attempted, and say that that's something that makes you who you are, which is as irrelevant. I mean, it is. I mean, you are some of your experiences, but to let experienced failure define you is not productive. On the one hand, I wish we could go back to the fact that failure was something that humans couldn't be. It was only projects. That would be nice. But I also think about sort of the paradox. On the one hand, society tells us that we should look up to and admire risk takers. Whether it's entrepreneurs, innovators, celebrities, and people who take social risk and financial risk. But at the same time, so they're rewarded, right? But at the same time, society says, "Oh, but if you fail, we're going to punish you for that.
Hmm.
We're going
Right.
to judge you negatively." And it's kind of like, it's really, it is a paradox. So Elon Musk, when he's winning, everybody's like, "Oh, he's so awesome," and then when he starts screwing up, then all of a sudden, "Oh no, so he's a failure." It's kind of strange, Society wants you to
Yeah.
be that risk-taking visionary, uh, and we glorify them. But then when things go wrong, we're like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that."
Yeah. We want it to be a movie script.
Yeah,
And it's not.
exactly.
You've said it's to the point even where people would rather do nothing than to risk doing something meaningful and failing.
Yeah, I think if there's considerable research on like what people are the most fearful of. Sort of, I guess public speaking always comes at number
Sure.
one. But if you look at it a little bit more in depth, the fear of failure is right up there on the top three, across many different studies.
Yeah.
And it's a fear of failure, and whether it be a professional failure or personal failure, it's something we're afraid of. And what I've seen in the past, being immersed in this for at least 5-7 years, is that we overestimate the discomfort of failure. So like,
Mm,
so I don't know if you're familiar with anxieties in general, but an
sure.
anxiety is, it's an we're afraid of an imagined future situation that's so bad we can't handle it. So we're afraid of this terrifying fantasy image of the future, right?
Yeah.
Um,
It's like
and
Mark Twain said. He
yeah,
said, I'm an old man who's known a great many troubles, most of which never actually happened.
favorite quote of mine. And I think failures in many ways like that as well, that we overestimate how horrible it's going to be. And what I like to remind myself and others is that, um, if a risk is worth taking, if it's meaningful, then the eventual discomfort of the failure is also going to be something you can handle and worthwhile. So I think we have to reframe that as well and say, like, yeah, failure is, you know um, highly likely even sometimes, but that discomfort, it will be is worth it, because we think, our that goal is worthwhile and meaningful.
Before we hit record today in our conversation, I asked you, I said, hey, how's the New York exhibit going? And you said, uh, amazing. You said, exponentially better than I could have imagined. And that is in contrast to some of your journey that happened after you and I spoke last. Can
Yeah.
you share a little bit about your own success through failure journey since we last spoke in 2017?
So 17, so the media attention for Museum of Failure was insane there, 2017, 18. And right at the peak there, my ex-business partner sued me as claiming that he owned half of Museum of Failure. So this was a, ginormous cluster, for a better lack of a better word. And that legal process, he had really good lawyers, and that legal process took about a year of paperwork and just pain in the ass, and it led to my personal bankruptcy ultimately.
Hmm.
And then at the end of it, everything, it was settled, and nothing happened out of it. So at the end of the
Yeah.
day, it could have been undone, or it should never have happened.
Hmm.
But it was painful at the time, and yeah, it was really uncomfortable. But to my point, what I said earlier about we overestimating the discomfort of failure, at the time, the whole bankruptcy thing, and it was a very public affair as well. The pain was there, but all my life as an entrepreneur and small business owner, the worst thing that can possibly happen to you is bankruptcy, right? It's like it's worse than death.
Yeah.
Um, but then here I was, bankrupt publicly, and it was bad, but it wasn't nearly as bad as I had ever imagined it to be,
Hmm.
not financially or reputation wise or anything else. So I'm not saying, oh, just don't worry about it, everything's okay. It's just like we do truly overestimate how horrible it is.
Samuel, I appreciate you sharing that because it's easy for me to sit over here behind my microphone, you to sit over there as the founder of the Museum of Failure and talk about this stuff. But this happens to us too. And when it does happen to us, it's no less painful. It's simply, we have to take our own medicine. And you walk through this experience. And what I want to point out to the listener is that this was not the demise of Samuel West. This was not the demise of the Museum of Failure. As a matter of fact, you have had, like you said, exponentially better, more success with this New York exhibit. You said it's gotten extended. It's so popular. It's so cool to hear that, whether it's despite failure or sometimes even in our lives, it's because of failure, we can find success on the other side. So sometimes it's despite failure, sometimes it's because of failure. And here we are on the other side. And I was so excited when you said how great it's going. I'm like, like what a great story. Now listen, for the listener, it's not always, sometimes you will find success a day, a week, or a month later. Sometimes it's years later, and it's so hard. Well, Steve Jobs said we can't connect the dots in our lives looking forward. We can only connect the dots in our lives looking backwards. And now we look backwards and we go, it wasn't as painful. And here I am, and you've created incredible success. So love that story. So thank you for sharing that. So, Sammy, your PhD focused on workplace sort of exploration and experimentation or playfulness and
Yes.
how that facilitates progress and how it facilitates innovation. Can you talk about that in the workplace? We've kind of generally talked about this as sort of a personal failure, as a personal thing, but how is it important in the workplace to innovate? I'm sorry, well, really to explore and experiment and be okay with failure, obviously at a cautious, sort of measured level, of course, but and how failure plays a role in success.
I'd like to answer that with an example.
Please.
So I I spoke this many years ago when I was doing research on playfulness at work and a playful approach, and how playfulness, which includes experimentation and exploration, is something that's conductive and benefits creativity and innovation. Anyway, so um, so pilots are not supposed to up, right? That's
Hmm.
like basically that's what they're there for, to make sure things are done correctly. and any kind of risks can be avoided. And so pilots don't train when they're flying. I mean, they have to do everything right. There's no exploration or experimentation going on, and there's no room for failure uh, at that point. But when their training is done in a simulator, and in the simulator, they can do all kinds of crazy shit because it's okay. It's a simulator. And one of the findings is that pilots that are playful in the simulator, playful meaning that they're willing to test new things and explore new ways of doing things, they are also much better at handling those emergency situations that are not supposed to happen, right? So by having that mindset, they are preparing themselves and training the handling of an unforeseeable future, which is the whole point of having a pilot in the front.
Sure.
Um, and then I've talked about that quite a bit. And then I was at a conference for doctors a few years ago, and and I was approached by an eye surgeon. He was a professor of eye surgery, and he said that the exact same thing is true for eye surgeons. They can't practice an experiment when they're operating on your eye, but so they practice in a simulator. And his experience was that uh, doctors in training that only follow the book and never explore or experiment, they don't have a playful attitude towards it, they cannot handle the situations that fall outside of the norm, like the outliers. But the doctors who have a playful approach, they can handle the situations that regularly occur that aren't supposed to happen. It's a lot of word there
Yeah.
to explain that having a playful approach does make us more skilled, and it practices creative problem solving, but also taking risks and learning from them.
And for myself and my listeners, we're all sitting here nodding our heads saying, yeah, that makes sense. I get that. Like logically, I can put that together and that makes sense. Can you share any concrete examples or suggestions on how we might do this, especially for the leaders who are listening, but for anybody who's listening? Like, how do we actually do this? Have you heard of any companies who do this actively? How do we take this and actually implement this in our workplace?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question.
Mm,
When it comes to, I separated a bit. When it comes to a culture that's accepting of failure, there's some great research on psychological safety. It's a concept that is probably one of the hottest concepts in organizational psychology right now, where it means to create a culture within a team or a work group it's where being vulnerable is not something that's punished by the team.
mm,
So you can be vulnerable, you can bring your full self to the workplace, which also includes owning up to your failures, asking the stupid questions, etc., not knowing things you probably should. That's probably how I would say how focusing on psychological safety is how the corporate side of things is sort of leaning in the right direction. um, for us as privately or as individuals, I'm a big believer in playfulness and a playful approach, that it to what we do, to our relationships, to being a parent, to being a partner, whatever, any aspect of our lives. If we can experiment in non critical situations and experiment with new behaviors and new ways of doing things, and learn from that feedback loop, then I can't think of a better way of conducting or doing personal development than
mm.
testing things and seeing what happens.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can role model it, and I'm thinking about myself now for as a father of four children, and in my business, like how can I role model failure and that playfulness and that the growth that can come from failure, and for you leaders out there, like how can you step up and point out your own failures and even what you learned from it, maybe even find somebody on your team who has tried something recently and they failed from it, and ask them, maybe pull them aside and before the meeting, and don't just throw them under the bus, but ask them, can I share this? And can you talk about some of the learnings from it and how, we need to use this type of experience to learn and to grow and to innovate. I mean, have, like Samuel said, discussions on this. Don't brush it under the rug. Don't whisper about it in corners. Bring it out into the open and create a psychologically safe environment where growth and innovation can happen. You're going to, people will be happier. And guess what? You're going to make more money and your business is going to be more successful. Win win.
Definitely. Win-win all the
Yeah.
way around. And it's a more fun place to work.
Yeah. Samuel, for those who want to check out the Museum of Failure or find you, follow you, otherwise engage with you, where do they go?
Best is museumoffailure.com. Right now, the show is in Brooklyn, and then it continues the tour to the major cities in the United States. And I'm horrible. I'm horrible at LinkedIn and social media, so don't bother. Just send me an email.
Excellent. Samuel, thank you so much for coming back on the show. Keep up doing the amazing work that you're doing through the Museum of Failure.
Thank you so much. Likewise.